What are the benefits of walking? We all hear that message, walk more, and people think, well, I am walking enough, I'm doing it every day. So we hear that message, but actually we're not necessarily optimizing the way that we walk with our walking quality and our technique to get the benefits. So there's a bit of a disconnect there of what we hear and actually what maybe we can actually really experience from a physiological health perspective, from a cardiovascular health and lung perspective, and also importantly from a cognitive perspective. And there are some really exciting research studies now about the power of how we walk, not necessarily the quantity of what we walk or how many steps we do. There is resonance in that without a doubt, but it's actually much more about how we walk.
May is National Walking Month in the UK, and every year I walk daily and document it online with the aim of inspiring others to create a new habit using one of the most accessible forms of movement we have, walking. I've always enjoyed walking, but when I was in pain and had to stop running, I realised I needed to replace it. So walking became my saviour, particularly mentally, and now I love it more than ever. One of the reasons I wasn't convinced it would be a good replacement for running was because I wrongly believed it wasn't something you could use to help stay fit. This week's guest, Joanna Hall, decided to create a walking system, Walk Active, to help people achieve their goals by walking more efficiently and doing so with the help of others on the same journey. We talk about the benefits of walking in general, but we also try to bust a few myths and give some practical tips to encourage you to join me walking daily in May and perhaps reset the place walking takes in your life. You never know where it could take you. I started by asking Joanna which other types of movement she enjoys.
Oh, really good question. I like to dance. I'm not very good at it, but I do like to dance. I'm a bit of a shimmy. Also, I really enjoy tennis. I played quite a bit of tennis when I was younger. And hockey. I hung up my hockey boots. Well, when I was at university, I hung up my hockey boots when I left university. And I did really enjoy my hockey then. I say field hockey because my daughter is a hockey player as well, and she plays in the States and they call it field hockey. But and I never ever thought I'd pick up my hockey stick again. And I was watching her, and you know what, like you're watching your kids, and sometimes you kind of like think, oh, I'm there. And I watched her for another season. I was like, oh, I really want to be there. And I watched for the third season. I thought, oh, stuff this. And England Hockey actually have a really great scheme called Back to Hockey. And I actually did that. It's just 6 weeks. It's completely free service. But it's just a lovely way of reconnecting with something that you may have done when you were younger. Anyway, I did that. And then I actually ended up playing 5 seasons as an old girl, as they call you in the day. And I've absolutely loved it.
Wow.
So
That's
yeah,
brilliant.
variety of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's fantastic. It's always really interesting to hear, because obviously when you see people online and you see what their main thing is, it's nice to sort of get behind it. And obviously the whole point of becoming an efficient mover is the capability to do other things. And particularly I love that story because it's about trying something new that you did it before, but you probably relegated it to the cupboard and thought probably never again.
I never ever thought I'd pick up my hockey stick again. And it was only like when you just think, oh, that looks kind of, that quite appeals to me.
What did your daughter think?
Well, she's actually rather good, I have to say. She's a goalkeeper. She's pretty good. So part of my motivation for doing it was thinking, oh, there'll be a time when maybe we can play together, when they got to an age when the adults can play together. Well, I probably ended up playing about 3 matches with her, and then she went up the echelons and I was playing in the lower leagues. But it doesn't matter. It was the joy of it. And
that's fantastic.
I played for a team where there was a combination of younger players coming through into the adult game, as well as sort of us adults. And it was just a really positive, exciting, joyful thing to do at a moment where I never thought I would do that again. And it was a great segue, a great way to segue. And I think what you're saying about how make movement matter, it's the ability to have that confidence in your body. And maybe at times when you're not too sure if it's there, but because of how you try to get your recruitment pattern better, it works quite well. But yeah, it's joyful. I do like to dance though, I have to say. I think that's really the rhythmical movement. And obviously that's kind of what we both come in. The rhythmical movement is really is really powerful for
And
upskilling as well.
the joy that absolutely, and it's, that's such an innate, joyful thing that when you're allowed to just let your body go.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of a flow state thing to it as well. Once you have released the demons of who's watching me or how on earth do I look, once you've got up past all that and you're just enjoying it, then you do sort of tap into that lovely combination of brain and body and flow. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, as long as you're enjoying it, which is a good segue into walking, which is why we're chatting today, obviously, which we both love. And I came across you when I attended one of your online workshops years and years ago. And I was just intrigued by the different ways that you positioned how getting people to identify how they walked now. And I thought, hang on, what do you mean? Everyone just walks, don't they? And yet, now that I'm more of a movement geek, obviously, I really notice different patterns of the way people do things and how they hold themselves. So yeah, I've followed you ever since because I find it brilliant to watch and learn and listen. We're going to talk about that more. But I wanted to start with talking about, because you have educated yourself hugely about this over the years, about the benefits of walking. And I think a lot of people hear the benefits. Yeah, we're getting outside. It's good for your mental health. You're getting your blood flowing and so on. But I wanted to really sort of knuckle down on some of the really the key benefits that can help you not just in walking, but also in the rest of your life and for doing other activities or for just living well day to day. So what would you say are a few of those key things?
Well, can I just jump back a little bit, first of all, to say, because the whole idea of actually teaching people to walk better or, there is a walking technique sounds really, really contentious. And sometimes I feel I'm a bit like Hans Christian Andersen, that story of the Emperor's New Clothes. You think, oh my God, why on earth do we need to be taught how to walk? We've been doing it from roughly 14 months of age. So surely we're really, really good at it. I do it every day. So I totally take that on board. But what I would say is if you wanted to actually get better at tennis, with your serve or, your front crawl in swimming or your breaststroke or hockey or golf drive, we kind of appreciate there's skills that we can learn, drills that we can practice to get better at that actual technique and improve our performance and also give more joy. So we kind of understand that sort of on maybe a more sophisticated movement patterns. But when it actually comes to walking, we take that for granted.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, everything that we do is actually on two legs, walking from point A to point B. And lifestyle does this to us. Maybe we're sitting down. Mental well-being and anxiety can do this to us. Plus, as you'll be well aware, and lots of people are aware, we do have muscular imbalances.
Yeah.
And obviously our own physical story. So when we go to move what we think is correctly and put one foot in front of the other from point A to point B, the movement pattern is suboptimal. So we don't necessarily get those benefits. And I think that's part of the challenge, really, when we're talking about, okay, what are the benefits of walking? We all hear that message, walk more. And people think, well, I am walking enough. I'm doing it every day. So we hear that message, but actually we're not necessarily optimizing the way that we walk with our walking quality and our technique to get the benefits. So there's a bit of a disconnect there of what we hear and actually what maybe we can actually really, really experience from a physiological health perspective, from a cardiovascular health and lung perspective, and also importantly from a cognitive perspective. And there are some really, really exciting research studies now about the power of how we walk, not necessarily the quantity of what we walk or how many steps we do. There is resonance in that without a doubt, but it's actually much more about how we walk. So,
and I love that because that's, there's so many people who have are so pushed for time. Yes. And therefore, if they have brilliantly managed to prioritize that walk, they want to use that time well, don't they?
Yeah. And
they
also,
want to get the best out of it, surely.
Yeah, definitely. I think, so part of my passion about this was, I think I'm time short and I like to squeeze everything in. I like to make, that's just a little bit my personality. So I like to make everything kind of effective. And when you're busy, the idea of like traditionally our perception of going to the gym or going for a workout, maybe say 45 minutes an hour. Let's just call it convenience an hour. And let's say on a good week, we might do that 3 times a week. So, if we did the maths, that's 7 days in a week, that's 24 hours. My maths isn't brilliant, but that's a total of 168 hours that we've got. And
That's
let's
pretty
say
good.
we sleep 10, let's say someone's going to write in and say, that's the wrong maths.
It's fine. It's
Whatever.
fine. It's
Okay.
about right.
Bear with us. But the idea is, you've got that amount of time, and assume we've got the luxury of resting 10 hours every night. That gives us roughly sort of 98 hours over a week when we can have family life, social life, work life, party life, exercise life. And we do maybe 3 hours of exercise a week. Our perception of that is good. So if we just do the simple maths, and I think this is quite an important point in my experience as a sports scientist, if we do the simple maths, many people will consider that to be a good week, and we will expect a lot of difference and change, whatever that change is, whether it's from a cosmetic body shape perspective, whether it's an energy perspective, whether it's actually a shift in our actual health physiological markers like blood pressure, cholesterol markers. We can often expect a lot of change in those 3 hours. But in actual fact, sometimes that barrier is it's actually hard to find those 3 hours, motivation-wise, fitting into life. And we expect so much, and then we don't necessarily get the results. So I really think about turning it upside down and doing something little and often that is a foundation of our movement pattern, and actually doing it to the best of our ability. That's where I think can become really powerful. And so to come back to your point about the benefits of walking, there is a disconnect, because actually when we don't do it to the best of our ability, the optimization of those benefits not that necessarily there. So managing anxiety, to having a positive impact on our blood pressure, our cholesterol levels, also stimulating our bone health, because people often think that walking isn't necessarily powerful enough to stimulate the osteoclast to be active, and that's actually not necessarily the case, because when you walk better, your foot mechanics are better, you get more pressure against the ground. So it can really be that one pill that we all should be doing, and actually be really excited about it. I'm on a mission to make walking the new sexy. That's what I'm doing.
Love it. Well, it already is to me. So
yes, baby.
You've got me. But also so many people.
You've got your copies going on. Anyway, we diverse.
Yes, and that was before the recording started.
That was before the recording.
That's in the outtakes, folks. But yeah, and I think, ironically, I think the lockdowns really helped, because in the sense that people could do very little else if they didn't have equipment at home, they didn't have the wherewithal to sort of search out, or they just didn't want to be, they wanted to get out because they're feeling frustrated. They would get out walking, and we have the local walking track, not a track where I go walking, that was like the M25, which, for those who don't know, is a very busy road around London. And before, you could hardly see a soul. It really got people out there. So, but you're right. It's the understanding the benefits is one thing, feeling the benefits is another. Yeah. And I think all of these ways of moving, once you find that you're sensing some kind of benefit, whichever it is, I think that's so helpful to then help you to continue to ingrain that pattern and want you to keep trying. Because when you don't feel that benefit, and I think often the gym's a really interesting one, because you can come out absolutely exhausted, and maybe you've had a bit of an endorphin high, but often, if you've sat at a desk all day and then you go at the end of the day, you're already very tired even going in. Whereas with walking, I think I find it can be an incredibly refreshing thing for body and mind, and you come back actually almost invigorated.
Yeah, there's a couple of points, if I could just interject here. I think sometimes our perception, when it comes to the end of the day, and we may feel tired, we can feel tired, and in our mind we cast back and we think about our day and we think, well, I've had a busy day, but a busy day can really fall into different kind of categories. So your busy day may be because geographically you've been, I've done the school run, I've actually then gone to a doctor's appointment, I've actually then gone over to my place of work, I've come back, I've then gone to the supermarket, got my food, come back, gone then to pick up the kids. We're busy in a so we're geographically active. Yeah. And then maybe we're kind of like cognitively active because of our actual demands of thinking about our family life. As a relative who's not very well, we're doing some jobs for them to help them out. Other things that are happening on social life, planning holidays, planning our kids' life, planning our work life, planning our social life. So cognitively at the end of the day.
Okay, I now feel exhausted. Just saying it.
We've been cognitively active, but that doesn't necessarily translate to being physically active, which sounds really kind of very simplistic, but in actual fact, that creates what you talk about as a barrier, because we kind of subconsciously think, okay, I've done enough, I'm tired, but that is a barrier. So it's like shifting, where are we in terms of navigating each day and actually trying to make things a little bit simpler and more accessible. But little and often, and just to give you an example now, if you're talking about going out, a lot of the research is historically about the quantity of steps that we do. But now there's really strong evidence about the pace that we walk and the quality of our movement pattern, how we recruit our muscles. So, for example, in terms of pace, often people talk about a brisk walking pace. But I think in my experience as a sports scientist and creating Walk Active, the concept of a brisk pace is a little bit like, well, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
And being slightly out of breath, that's really quite subjective. And research now has shown that there is a range of walking cadences, that's beats per minute that you walk at, where really it should be at least 100 beats per minute, roughly up to about 128, 130. Now, in my experience, teaching this and developing this over a number of years, if you're walking at 130 beats per minute, that's pretty fast.
Right.
And I consistently see, with respect, that individuals who walk at that speed of their legs, their technique is very dependent on their hip flexors, which contributes to lower back pain and knee discomfort.
Right.
So that would be one observation I make. But also to think that when you
can I just stop you there? From that, do you mean that they're sort of pushing themselves so much to go faster that they can't use the techniques that you talk about because perhaps they have limitations from the way they're living in the rest of their lives? For example, if someone sits a lot, has quite tight hip flexors, then gets up, goes out and walks quite fast, they can't possibly open out that front part of their body in the same way when they're pushing themselves so fast. So actually reining them back will benefit them from the perspective that they'll actually be able to improve their posture by opening out that hip flexor, if we just focus in on that, because they're not rushing too much. They're doing enough, but they're really focusing on that technique.
Yeah. So, yes, I definitely would say that. The way that I talk about pace when we work with clients with Walk Active is that pace is actually a function of three things. So your pace is a function of your technique, it's a function of your stride length, and it's a function of your cadence, i.e. how quickly your legs move. The challenge I often experience is that we just think about how quickly I move my legs to get pace. Right. So when you actually work on your technique, we want to be walking out of our space. So we recruit the posterior chain of our body, so much more of our glutes and our hamstrings, and we work in an eccentric phase where we pre-lengthen, and that creates more propulsion forward. That has an implication on the amount of power that propels us forward. That has an implication as we then open up our hip flexors to allow the stride to get a little bit longer at the back. So then when we add, lastly, how quickly we move our legs, pace becomes really powerful. Yeah. So to come back to my point, if we aren't necessarily worried about our technique, but we want to make our walk more effective, consistently we just think about speeding up our legs and maybe picking up a pair of hand weights, which we really don't want to do because that puts additional strain on the shoulder joint. And research has shown that needs to be at least 5 pounds in each hand to have any corresponding cardiovascular impact on our heart and lungs. Right. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I'm going to pick up my hand weights, don't do that. Weighted vest, yes, but make your technique your number one priority.
So weighted vest or weight in backpack?
Weight in backpack, yeah. I think that what I like about a weighted vest, and just to go back to one thing, you need to make sure your technique is correct first.
Before.
Before.
Yes, because this is adding load.
Yeah, because otherwise you're just putting load on a non-symmetrical body. And it doesn't mean that we all have to be body beautiful. And that's not about this at all, because we will all have our own personal story, whether we've had operations, whether actually if we are listening to this and we've had a pregnancy, how our babies have sat inside us. All of those things, maybe we've had an accident, an injury, all of those things create our own personal story. So when we go to put one foot in front of the other, our alignment is slightly non-symmetrical. And that's absolutely fine. That's part of life's joy and makes us unique. But we want to make sure that when we do walk, we're actually trying to create an alignment pattern that allows us to create fluidity of movement pattern so that we are optimizing our results for smoothness, for posture, for breath, for pace, if that's our focus, for the consistent bipedal movement pattern. So the rhythmical element of the bipedal movement, that's really where we get the real juicy health benefits and the real juicy cardiovascular benefits. And also, if we're talking about a situation where maybe we don't necessarily like the idea of walking or like the idea of exercise, when we start to recruit the muscles correctly in the right way, at the right time, right sequence, there is a flow and it does feel good. There is like, whoa, this feels really good.
Yeah.
And, you know, it may sound a bit bizarre, but yeah, you get a buzz. And I've trained many ex-runners who've given up running because their joints are like, oh, whatever, not what there. Or menopausal women who have like, I don't think I'm going to get that buzz from walking. I really don't think. And it's like they've blown it out the water for them with the audio coaching or the music, walk to the beat sessions, or actually just really fundamentally connecting with your body in a positive way. And I suppose I am passionate about it because I see so many people give up on their bodies and think it's too late. I hang up. I can't do that. And you know what you're doing with your podcast and with your work, Wendy, it is really powerful because our bodies are a gift. And the way that we want to move today, we want to make sure that that is an investment that kind of gives a catalyst for us to want to move tomorrow, but also creates momentum that we have better movement quality next week and next month. And we can also achieve a physical benefit, a confidence benefit, a postural benefit with it. But importantly, we can sustain that today, tomorrow, next month, next year, but also next decade, and next generation. That's
exactly.
That's what's powerful, you know.
And being with a new generation, or like you just did, as we talked about right at the start, taking up hockey again, showing your daughter that at whatever age, actually, I feel confident enough in my body. I'm going to give it a go and I'm going to have some fun. And what better message is there than that to our children? I mean, she's obviously already all over it, but what it says to her is, I'm not going to, if I love something, I'm not going to give it up as I age. I'm going to keep going because why should I stop? Why should and she, obviously sounds like she's going to, you know, be lovely and fit and healthy and an exerciser for life. And she's had you as an example, but it's still a really fair example.
Yeah, you never know. But I think also as we get to a certain age, we start to think about our own aging responsibility so that we're not, inverted commas, a burden. We actually maintain our physical independence. And, you know, we know from the research that once we actually lose our physical independence and we are physically dependent, that has huge implications to society, personally, relationship wise, you know, just your whole perception of what you can do and what you would like to do, and that's really powerful.
And I think that the brilliant thing about walking is that, as you say, if we are lucky enough to be able to walk, then it's therefore always accessible to us. It doesn't feel like that far out of reach thing where someone does a couch to 5K run, and brilliant, and that's fantastic if their body is, you know, sort of ready and can do that. And that's great. I mean, it's funny that you mention it, but, you know, I was a runner and I had to give up because of my pain, and my injury that was no specific injury, but, and I had to sort of, and I talk about this in the introduction, I had to find something else. I already loved walking, but I had barriers about it because for me, well, it was, you know, it was the sweating and the pushing yourself, the sort of mental challenge. And actually, now that I enjoy walking so much more, I realize how much more I get out of my time outdoors walking than I ever did when I was running. Because when I was running, I wasn't noticing the little things and getting the joy from seeing things, maybe because I was running so inefficiently, but I wasn't absorbing the world in the same way.
Yeah.
But also I didn't have the time. I remember trying to do things like work out what split times I was doing and all sorts, trying to do some maths. And I couldn't even really hold it in my head. Whereas when I'm walking, I can solve problems.
So that's,
it can be
that's really,
creative.
really, because the research now is showing that when you walk at specific cadences, it has different implications cognitively, creatively, problem solving, as well as obviously physiologically, for your fitness and your heart and your lungs. So if you actually have a problem and you want to problem solve, or you're looking for creative thought, the best thing to do is to actually go out and walk, which is often said, but actually you want to walk at a cadence of roughly 100 to about 110.
So tell me, how do people time that? What's a little tip for people for doing that? Music's a good one, isn't it?
Music's a good one. In the Walk Active app, we have walk to beat sessions at different cadences, and different times. So you can choose the sessions by time and by goal and by motivation. But essentially, that's a really, really good question. If you feel that you are dawdling, take a phone, measure very simply, walk for 15 seconds, count how many steps you took, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then multiply by that 4, and that will give you an indication.
Yes, and all you need is an indication. You need it to be approximately where it should be. Yeah,
and we have very simple things like we just have metronome beats in the app as well, just to help people. So you don't necessarily have to use always the walk to beat sessions, but the idea is, and I'd be interested to see if some of your listeners comment on this as well, that people may go for a walk and may start thinking that they're walking at a certain pace, but then they get distracted. So the key thing is actually the consistency in terms of the physiological benefits you might want out of it, but also the consistency of the bipedal movement of how it feeds your brain. So problem solving and creative thought has been shown that actually walking at a slower cadence, 100 to 110, is better for that actual ability for your brain just to think. And Coleridge was an absolute fan of walking for creative thought to stimulate, his writing. And he talks about also walking in areas where you have rainfall and you get stimulated by negative ions. So the rain hits and the negative ions. So the combination of this can really be like a fantastic picnic for your brain, So if you're experiencing a barrier, you don't necessarily need to think about, I've got to go out to do something for my blood pressure, because sometimes that may not just light your bag, but actually, if you've got something that's troubling you, that's giving you a bit of hassle at night, it's making you wake up in the middle of the night, you're worried maybe about your children or a family relative, take that with you for your walk. Yeah. And if you can combine that with a friend when you're actually both walking with good techniques, so you're actually walking out of your space, your hip flexors are open, you're much more aware of your posture, that also then has an impact on your diaphragm. So when we walk with poor posture, and if we are concerned or consumed by something, and sometimes we do walk with worries, we see people head down, leaning in, power walking, maybe that concept, I'm trying to really walk, I'm trying to make my walk more effective. That is false economy. So you really want to be thinking about the length between the hip flexors, but also between the ribs and the hips. And that's really what, the whole walk out technique does, that everything becomes effective. But when you can actually walk with better technique and the diaphragm moves better, we have many people who maybe experience from long COVID, maybe, respiratory issues, where the concept of exercise can feel very intimidating. Yeah. And they may approach it with fear. And the ability to fall in love with your body, which may sound a bit bizarre, but the ability to fall in love with how it may make you feel. I know you're big into feeling. Feeling is important because essentially what we're talking about is something that's completely abstract. Yeah. We're talking about something that's intangible. And it's really hard to kind of give that a context. So if you can get some feel to that, then that really gives that momentum to today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next decade. Yeah. And that gives hopefully that joy externally and internally.
So let me ask you a few practical questions then. So things that people have sort of messaged me about and that I would like to ask about as well. So walking poles. Yes. Can that help with technique, or is it just a different way of walking?
I would call it a different way of walking. As a creator and founder of Walk Active, I set about creating something that actually helped me personally, and that you don't need to have any fancy equipment. You can just like take your body and go. What I would say also about the body is a bit like a pair of scissors. So let me just kind of paint an analogy for you. If you picked up a pair of scissors and you actually went to cut a piece of paper and you're holding onto the handles, if you open up the blades of the scissors, you can open up the blades a little bit and slide the paper in, and your hands would be open a little bit, okay? Conversely, you could open up the blades wide, and when you're holding the handles, your hand would be wide, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you walk, there is a correlation between the amount of mobility that you have in your shoulder girdle and the amount of mobility and range of motion you have in your pelvic girdle. So if we are tight and we hold a lot of tension in the shoulders, and we don't have much movement there, when we go to walk, that completely translates to almost like that pair of scissors when we go to cut that piece of paper, but we don't actually open up the blades very wide. So we are then dependent on the hip flexors, even though we're going out to try to do something that's really beneficial for our body. But our good intentions are actually, taking us down a spiral of not optimizing that. So we really want to be thinking about walking with a pair of scissors so we open, got mobility in the shoulder and mobility in the hips. So the body's much more expansive. Doesn't mean that we're overstriding, but everything's coming from the back. And that's what really helps to create that smooth movement pattern. And that's when it becomes, I think, really quite powerful. Oh, I think we've frozen. There we go. Wendy, do you want to just answer me that question again? Because I got so worried about so excited about my analogy of my scissors. I think you're asking me about poles. So when
we were talking about poles,
yes.
So, but I can see, yes, I can see where you're going.
So you want to have rotational ability with the upper body.
Yes.
And so I'm not anti-poles, but I don't think you need to have them. And I think there is research that says that they can possibly help you increase more cardiovascular benefit, but you've got to be really dynamic with the poles.
Okay.
And you can create that very effectively with your own movement quality and how you expand that. So if you're thinking, I've got to have poles, and you're using it as a barrier to go out and walk, don't let that be a barrier. Okay. Yeah. If you actually think, oh, I like the idea of having poles and that gets you excited and that gets you out the door, then use it as
then use the poles. Totally agree. Totally agree.
Fundamental technique is really, be proud of how your body can move.
Yeah. Yeah. And exactly, using the instrument you have as well as you can. And then that's going to then hopefully ripple into other situations of movement. That's what we want. We want to feel that confidence in the way our body moves. And we talked before, obviously, so, and I think you didn't manage to get to the end of it. We talked about weighted vest versus weighted bag. And that was presumably because it's mirroring your shape.
Yeah, you want the symmetry. So it's even at the front and even at the back. So very often, a lot of people can experience discomfort in the lower back, partly as we're intimating because of tight hip flexors, but also actually the relationship of how we can sink in the hips quite a bit. And we're heavy in the hips. So we can then think about trying to protect our back. And if we pull the abdominals in, which most people will try to do to protect their back, again, that can actually accentuate a misalignment. Yeah. So what we're trying to do, rather than pull the abdominals in, we want to be thinking about a little bit of space between maybe your belly and your belt, but actually more length. So there is greater length between your pubic bone and your belly button, rather than your belly button to your sternum.
Yeah.
Having a weighted vest will actually help symmetry. If you're wearing a backpack, sometimes it makes it harder to get the correct alignment. So,
and what about if you have to wear a backpack then?
If you have to wear, so a couple of tips I would say is, first of all, you want to make sure that actually the straps are, I know we're recording this, so people might want to watch it, but if you want to make sure the straps sit closer to your chest line rather than the edge of your shoulder.
Okay.
Because if your straps are on the edge of your shoulder, what you will do is we'll hunch the shoulders in to hold the backpack in place.
Yeah.
So either put a piece of string and pull the straps in.
And actually, you do get some that have a nice chest strap
you get
here,
nice chest
which
strap
feels better. Yeah.
It holds it. So when you're looking at your backpack, the straps are actually closer to your neck, and you can get particular models that actually cut and are shaped. So if you're female and, cross the bust line better, but also like for guys, they sit better. And that's really what you want them to do. And also to sit a little bit higher on your back rather than lower on your back.
Okay.
And then
and hip straps often.
Yeah, hip straps can be useful.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about kind of where you are walking with maybe a waist bag, my tips with a waist bag is actually you wear the waist bag at the small of your back, not at the front. So I see lots of people kind of have their waist bag, kind of here at the front. And my reservations about that is that when we actually have it at the front, we lose the awareness of what's happening to the front abdominal wall. Whereas if we slide it to the back, then again, that just helps the alignment. And we can use the cue of having the belt of the waistband as a way of sliding the fingertips to get that better alignment of drawing the abdominals in 20% and drawing them up 80%. So we get that length to stimulate the fascia all the way through the body.
Yeah, perfect. Useful. Thank you.
Okay, there we go.
And then the really obvious ones are shoes, because I think you and I are both barefoot fans. Not everyone in the planet is yet a barefoot fan, sadly. They all will be, I'm sure, in time. And the reason that barefoot shoes are so useful is because of the flexibility in the sole, and obviously that wide toe, because we need to spread our feet and we need to roll through our feet to use them well. And when I'm talking to people about walking, and I'm sort of showing them about pushing off with the back foot and rolling through that foot, I'm always very aware that the person I'm talking to could have such a thick sole on their walking boot that there's not a chance that they can do that. And then that's going to absolutely affect their ability to open out their hip flexors, fire their glutes and so on. So how do you sort of discuss that?
Yeah, so I get asked, this is probably one of the most popular questions that we get when people start to learn walk active.
I bet.
And I have to say, whilst I personally do wear barefoot shoes, I don't feel that a barefoot shoe is necessarily the first shoe that every single person should go into. Right?
No, absolutely not.
And I tend to answer this question in terms of criteria. I think there's 3 criteria to look for when you are choosing a walking shoe. So number 1 is that you actually want to have a wider toe box. Now, as you'll be aware, that will allow the foot to naturally spread. The foot has about 26 joints in it. Wherever you have a joint, it's there to have movement. And when you move, there should be a broadening of the breadth of your foot across the board of the foot. And what that will do is it will enhance the tracking from your toes all the way along the whole line of the foot. And that will enhance the tracking correctly from the foot to the knee up into the hip. So the leg then becomes a bit like a paddle as we push the ground away rather than pull it forward. So the toes should be able to spread. So a wide toe box is the first criteria that I suggest. The second criteria that I think is to look for is actually to have a squarer toe end. And the reason why I think a squarer toe end is great, quite a few shoes now, maybe not necessarily pointy, but they would encourage you to kind of roll through more the big toe. So the symmetry, as you peel that back foot off the floor, because you only need to be thinking about 1 foot at a time, as you peel that back foot off the floor, you want to appreciate that it's an even alignment through the big toe, the middle toe, and the little toe. So if you have a squarer toe end, that allows that tracking to be better. And again, that will then translate into better alignment through the knee and through the hip, utilizing the glutes, opening the hip flexors. And if we open up the hip flexors, then the abdominals can work and the posture is better, the diaphragm. It all holds up that whole connected toe
together
to work much better. It's like zoom, we are off. And then the final thing that I think in terms of criteria is a flexible sole. So if you have a flexible sole, when you're asking your foot to be more active and to stimulate the joint action through the foot, the shoe is responsive. But having worked in the fitness industry for over 30 years and having worked for a few shoe companies as a consultant and to different programs as well, what I would say is I think there is a case whereby you might have a stiffer shoe to begin with that has a wider toe box because you need to have a bit more support,
right?
But then as you become more pliable with your shoe, if your sole is not moving, what happens is that your foot wants to be mobile, but the shoe doesn't let you. So you then tend to tense the foot, and that creates the pressure up your
Makes
arm
me think of flip-flops, actually. That's when people are like, oh, but they're such relaxed shoes. But no, but if you really think about what you're doing, you're holding that shoe on your foot.
You can feel that now. So if this is kind of resonating with anybody, if you just hold your hand up in front of you and you really make a tight fist, really squeeze it tight. And if you feel your forearm, as you're making a clenched fist, you'll feel your forearm is really, really tight. You can feel those muscles tight. If you relax a hand, you can feel that this is now soft and relaxed. The forearm is soft and relaxed. And it's the same relationship with the foot.
Yes.
If we get a certain amount of functionality in the foot, but then the footwear is a little bit restrictive, then we're trying to force a movement pattern, and then the foot becomes a claw, and that then has consequences on the alignment and the muscular effort. And then it's like, oh, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable. That doesn't feel great. So those three criteria: wide box, square toe end, and a flexible sole, and moving more towards a neutral toe bed, I think does help. But it doesn't necessarily need to be your first port of call, because I just feel that for some people, having something that's a little bit more gradual and you transition to that can be a better, more positive experience, depending on your own stories that you have within your feet.
And if you're interested in barefoot shoes, or you've not heard of them, or you want to know a bit more about the sort of the why, I've got a great blog on my website, but at the same, well, it's not great. I wrote it. I've got a great blog.
No, you trumpet, Wendy. It is great. Everybody, get on Wendy's website. Read that blog about barefoot.
But also on the end of it, there's a really good link to Katie Bowman's list of most recent barefoot shoes. And therefore, giving something a try if you want to through that list is a great idea.
Yeah.
But the big caveat, and the reason that people sort of decide that they don't like barefoot, is because they go out and they just use barefoot shoes and wonder why it's uncomfortable. And it doesn't work. We have to transition. We have to allow those feet, to the joints, to wake up, to feel the feeling on the bottom of the feet, feeling the sort of the stones on the ground as you're walking. It's an unusual sensation.
Oh, totally.
I absolutely love now, but that can come, it can be a double-edged sword if you rush into it. So giving it a try, but with your normal walking boots in your backpack or whatever, taking them both so you can mix in and out, I think is a really, really good way to do it.
To ease into it, to dip into it. And I think, just as, you might change your wardrobe, your clothing wardrobe with the seasons, and we totally appreciate that. Think about your footwear. So, you see how you get on. What you don't want to be doing, though, in my experience, is if you're, for example, learning Walk Active and people come to me and they're wearing like a thick, really stiff tennis shoe, because that is so protective with what you need on a clay court surface or hard court surface when you're playing tennis, but it doesn't allow your foot to actually allow that joint mechanics through that foot, that pliability, that mobility. And it's a bit like having the analogy of, it's quite a warm sunny day as we're recording this. If I had left a ball of plasticine in the window as the sun shines on it, when we started talking on your podcast, Wendy, if I would now go to pick up that piece of plasticine, it'd be malleable. It'd be that kind of, ooh, that's kind of, malleable. And that's really what we'd like to think about our feet, to help for our balance and our proprioception, and our posture of how it feeds back into the brain. So footwear is, we love to spend money on footwear. We all like trainers. But it just those three criteria.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Very, very useful. Lots of practical stuff, which is fantastic. And so I think we've really hopefully bust the myth about the fact that walking isn't necessarily as beneficial for you in terms of your fitness, because I think you've proved that in every way. So that's brilliant. What other sort of barriers do you find that people come up with when you talk to them about using walking for all the benefits we've discussed?
So obviously, I think some people may have reservations about knees and hips and so forth like that. We do a lot of work with people who may be preoperative for knee replacement and hip replacement, as well as also afterwards. And what we've often found is that gives the alignment. When you create the correct structure going into an operation, that can be very beneficial for post-recovery. I think barriers like not having enough time, and I have to have the right kit. But actually, really what we're saying, whilst we've talked about having footwear, you don't necessarily need to have fancy kit. And I think a really good task to maybe bash down some barriers is to find yourself, if I may share this with you, I think this is quite a useful thing, to find yourself 3 locations where you spend quite a bit of time. And those 3 locations may be from your desk in your home, they may be from the school car run, they may be from the supermarket, they may be from a relative who you see, but find yourself 3 locations. And from each of those locations, I would encourage you to actually find yourself a 5-minute outback route, a 10-minute outback route, and a 15-minute outback route. So, and just map this down on a piece of paper, because what you're wanting to do is reduce the concentration, the thinking time, because if you're having to think about something, we tend to get a bit distracted from really why we're doing it. We know from neuroscience that when we get distracted, it can take sometimes about 25 minutes to get back on track to really what we're going to do. And then we've lost maybe those 5 minutes, those 10 minutes of when we could do that. And
or we just don't even start because we're so engrossed in the planning. I really love that idea. And when I had the school run, I no longer have a school run, but when I had the school run, I loved parking up where I was going to meet my child because it wasn't actually at school. He walked a bit and I walked a bit, and walking, I had to sort of track back in the time to make sure that I was meeting at the right time. But I look forward to it so much because it was the transition between my work day and then family time and being with him, and then being able to be as present as I could be with the "how was your day, dear" type conversations that are so important. And the nice thing was that when we then walked back, which is one of the great joys I think about walking, particularly with teenagers, is that you are not looking at each other. You're side by side. So you have that connection, you're close, but it's not as intense. So, and you're walking. So I loved that was the shift in the day, and I look forward to it. And I found it very easy to fit that in as, sometimes just 10 minutes, as you say, literally just 10 minutes, but it helped me to mentally shift and just also feel so much better.
Also because you had a different emotional sense with that as well, because it was like it really catalyzes and changes the dynamics in your family. As you say, it was your segue between your work mind and then your personal mind. And I think, again, that can be another way of shifting a barrier of actually, why am I using it? It doesn't necessarily need to be for a cosmetic shape change benefit. It doesn't necessarily need to be for a physiological benefit. It can actually just help me shift my mood, change my mindset, just help me walk off my day, create a bit of a chapter end and a chapter start. And the ability that when you are walking out in nature, it allows the brain to flit between what we call our active mode and our default mode. So we've got the optic flow as we're walking, we're seeing that. So the brain is really happy. It's like, oh, that's interesting, that's interesting, that's interesting. But then also we've got our focus of where we're going. So it kind of stimulates the brain in so many different levels that we may not necessarily get, or we can't get if we're in a gym and on a treadmill, for example. Or we're sat
at a laptop. No, it's so true. So to just finish off, tell us about Walk Active, because you started it in 2008, is that right?
Is that kind of officially that. It actually, Walk Active has it's a very personal space, really. I've always been, as a sports scientist, fitness educator, very passionate about the quality of movement. And I've always been understanding about, I think, the foundation and the value of walking as the foundation we can take right through our life. However, when I was 11 weeks pregnant with our daughter, I had deep abdominal surgery, and we had to sign a form that we could lose our daughter. Or we didn't know it was a daughter at the time, lose our baby. And when we came out of the operating theatre, the surgeon speaking to my husband and basically said, it didn't go that well. It was your wife's appendix. It was all twisted, inverted. And we had to go in 3 times, and she's got a lot of big scars. Anyway, I share that with you, Wendy, because I didn't set out to create Walk Active, the effective walking system. It came from a very personal space. I was hoping that my belly was going to continue to grow with my 11-week-old baby inside me. But at the same time, I had deep abdominal scar tissue quite high up. Right. And I knew, as a sports scientist and needing my body in what I did professionally, I thought, I'm really setting myself up here for postural problems, back problems, joint problems, as well as obviously wanting to try to be as fit as I could for this new transition phase in my life. So Walk Active came from a very personal space to try to walk myself post-operatively for my posture, for my joint care, as well as obviously my change of gravity changing as my belly grew. And then also, what could I do, coming back to barriers, that was going to actually help me fit in with my time, because I didn't know how my time, it's my first time mum. I didn't know how my life was going to change. How could I fit it in with my time that was good for my posture, et cetera, et cetera. So it came from a very personal space. And then as I worked with myself, I then started to go back to clients. We had a baby girl. She's now 18. And I started to work and teach it to clients. And clients were like, wow, this is really effective. Can you give us more? So the whole thing grew very organically. Where, I wrote the book and we developed the online program before the app. And then we worked with Southbank Sports Performance Laboratory, because anecdotally we were getting lots of people saying, I'm really getting fit through this. I've been a runner and I've never felt better. My joints are feeling good. I've walked down my medication and my risk of my people who are on antidepressants actually through Walk Active, even though they were walking, when they did Walk Active, actually they got much better changed in that. So anecdotally, we were getting really, really powerful stories, and which was wonderful. So I kind of felt very humbled by this, but I really wanted to give it some context. So we were fortunate enough to work with Southbank Sports Performance Laboratory with Professor Darren James, and we actually did an independent research study where we had a control group who were walking, and then we actually had a control group who I taught Walk Active, and it was over a 4-week period where they did 3 sessions a week, and we did their initial measurements where we took blood pressure, cholesterol, weight. We also took force plate measurements and postural alignment measurements, and we did them at the end. And the result of that was that Walk Active significantly improves your posture more than normal walking. Walk Active significantly reduces the joint strain at the knee and the ankle more than normal walking. And Walk Active also helps you walk up to 24% faster than normal walking. So I was really, I'm proud of that, because I think walking is something that we can all do, and we can all do it better. And it's not about being ministry of silly walks or anything like that. It's actually just a positive connection with you, so that our own recruitment pattern is optimal to improve our posture and to do joint care. So whether we're menopausal, whether actually we've never done exercise, whether we are about to have an operation, a knee replacement, a hip replacement, we're recovering from that. Actually, maybe we're just actually on the first steps and wanting to stave off dementia, and we actually want to make sure that we're walking at the right pace. It's really powerful. So as a sports scientist, I've just been really humbled and grateful that I'm on a journey of helping people walk better, and whatever better means. I think I like that word better.
I love that word better. It's just progression and moving on from where you're at right now. It doesn't matter how much. It's just trying to move that needle just slightly. And for whatever your goals are, whatever your intentions are, in whatever way it can help you. And the reason that I love movement is because it's one of the very few things that's pretty much always positive, and brings unexpected benefits, as we've talked about. You may be aiming at one thing, but suddenly you find something else improves in your life. And that's the wonderful thing about being able to access something. And access is a really good word here, because that's the lovely thing. If you have the ability to walk, it's so accessible wherever. You take your walking with you wherever you go. It's always an option. And therefore, and as you say, no kit needed, off you go. And you are highly likely to feel better for doing it than not doing it. And that's just such a small ask, really. So it's brilliant what you're doing. And, I've looked into the app, and we've had conversations about it, because I think it's such a brilliant system. And so user friendly for people, because it really helps them. You hold their hand through the process. And that's really, really important, because often we will sort of come into things and there'll be sort of too much information, overwhelmed, because there's so much. And yet you have lovely progressions for people to really empower them and get them started and moving. And I think that's, is brilliant. So,
so it's, I think when you have a passion, also when you can come up with an idea and think, oh, this is a good idea, I'll get people moving in this way. But when you're actually teaching it with real people day in, day out, it just gives you so much empathy, and how you teach, and you try to paint pictures so that people can feel, we're talking about this whole feel, because that's when it becomes real and it becomes personal to you, so you feel better. And that's really what we try to do with the certification program now, so people can actually teach in their community. And it's powerful for if you're a Pilates teacher or a yoga teacher, because it's so much about postural alignment. But also we have people going through the certification now who are podiatrists and osteopaths and physios, because it very much joins the dots on the wonderful work like you're doing, Wendy, where you're maybe more in not a static situation, but very specific to help people enhance their mobility and their range of motion and their flexibility and their confidence and their to make that movement pattern work. But obviously how we can join it together with fluidity so that every single step becomes effective. And yeah, it's something I am passionate about, but there are some amazing benefits to the program, but joining dots with work that you're doing as well, Wendy. So, make movement matter. That's what it's about.
Absolutely. And if you're lucky enough to fall in love with a movement like walking, it was running for me. I'm actually really pleased now it's walking. In fact, I'm more in love now with walking, I think, than I was with running, in all honesty. Yeah, because
so why is that?
I think because it hasn't got the competitive element. And I never bring that into it. So it's not about the miles on the clock. It's not about necessarily how fast I go, although I like to have a good pace and feel like I have moved in a certain way. And because it brings me so much more mentally, it's so much more with being, as I said before, about being able to see the things around me changing through the seasons. But for me, I now am at the point that I literally know as soon as I step into the fresh air, knowing that I'm going to go on a walk, I almost already feel better that second.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do if I turned around and went back in. I wouldn't get the same benefit. But I know I am going to feel better in mentally and physically from doing it. And that's from repeated 5-10 minute walks up to much longer walks. Yeah. Because I've created that lovely feedback loop that says, this is what you need. To the point that if I don't go and I'm indoors too much or I'm more sedentary, like all movement forms for me now, my body tells me it's craving, get out there and go. Yeah. And I feel really fortunate that I've kind of got to that point. And not that I can always go. And, we're all limited. And some days less so than others, absolutely. But it's a mainstay.
It is. And I think also the idea that it has to be 20 minutes or it has to be half an hour, it really doesn't. No. The whole idea that 5 minute out back, or, studies now have shown that 9 minutes, to walk 1,000 steps, you have an implication on managing your cortisol, or bringing down your anxiety levels. So it really doesn't need to be a massive amount of time to give you a really significant payback. And I think sometimes we can be so focused on it has to be so much that actually becomes that barrier. And really taking that first step is really powerful to give you that momentum. When you work on your technique and you improve your quality of motion, suddenly you do get into that flow much better. Yeah, without a doubt.
Thank you so much for chatting with me. It's been such a lovely conversation, and lots of practical bits. Yeah, I know. If we'd had those little mics with the sort of muffler thing on it, we could have both done it out walking and tried to ignore the wind's noise.
Yes, exactly.
But at least we're both pretending while stood here.
Exactly. If anybody's watching this thinking, flipping out, two crazy women. Can I just say thank you so much for having me as a guest on Make Movement Matters. It really, it's been lovely. Really, really lovely chatting to you and
it's
sharing our equal passion. So
yes, it's a total pleasure, and it's always just so easy chatting with you because when you do share a passion like that, it's a lovely thing. So no, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm going to be putting all the Walk Active details and your details in the show notes for everyone to find. But you literally just have to put Walk Active into the internet, and boom, you're there. Or social media. So
social media. So that's great. Thank you so much indeed, Wendy. I really, really appreciate that, and thanks for having me as a guest.
Pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.